Once upon a time, there was a place of carved stone faces. A man with a lantern lay sleeping in a dreamless sleep. The man knew nothing. One day, the man woke up. He rubbed the dried ink caked over his eyes and opened them. Around him, he saw other people stirring, and beyond, a horizon of unbroken darkness. A woman approached the man with a lantern. Her soft hand reached out to him. They had no words. They were a mystery to each other. Suddenly, a monster emerged from the darkness, its eyes wild with hunger. It attacked. The people were no match for the monster. It tore their flesh and crushed their bones between its teeth. Some it devoured whole. Overcome with terror and grief, the man with the lantern collapsed to the ground. Cold stone noses pushed into his side. There was no escape. But the man did not want to die. Desperately grasping at the cold stone faces, he felt a crack and tore at it with all his might. A piece of stone came free. It was sharp and deadly. The man with the lantern scrambled to his feet. His weapon clenched in his fist. He took a deep breath and roared into the darkness. Somewhere in the place of stone faces, nameless men and women stand together. They have nothing but a need to survive and a lantern to light their struggle. Hi Not Board Gamers and welcome back to Not Board Gaming. I'm your host, I'm Mark. Now today's video I'm going to be talking about 3 words, and those 3 words are possibly the 3 most contentious words in board gaming. When these 3 words are uttered, sides will be taken, battles will be fought, people will be laying into each other about whether these 3 words are the saviour of board gaming or whether these 3 words are total trash. That's right, I'm not talking about Golden Geek Awards. The 3 words I'm talking about are the behemoth that is Kingdom Death Monster. So I realise that this is a little bit of a long video and not everybody's going to want to watch every part of this video. So what I've done is I've broken it down into its constituent parts. If you check the timestamps on the side there, you can fast forward and miss out some of my wonderfully deep and in-depth analysis to go to the various favourite bits that you may want to go to. So please check out the timestamp, and if you don't want to listen to me waffle on, then go and check out the bits that you want to watch. If someone was to say to you those 3 words of Kingdom Death Monster, what are the first things that would absolutely spring to mind for most people? Well, I think number 1 for a lot of people would be expensive, and there is absolutely no denying that Kingdom Death Monster has an initial huge barrier to entry, which is this kind of £300, $400 just for the base game alone. I think, something other people might say is miniatures and models and painting, and you know what? There is no denying that to get the most out of this game, you absolutely have to make some, not necessarily all, but some of the potentially hundreds of models that come with not only the base game, but all of the various expansions. What else can people think of as well when you mention the words Kingdom Death Monster to them? Well, I think immersive is a thing that a lot of people will say as well. Those people that have played Kingdom Death Monster will absolutely get sucked into these campaigns that last for tens, if not hundreds of hours, and when they finish one, generally they will go straight back in and try another one as well. Expansions, yes, I think expansions is a huge thing. Don't get me wrong, and we'll talk about what the base game provides, but if you want to add to your core Kingdom Death Monster experience, then there are plenty of expansions to do that. Delays! The genius that is Adam Poots. We know that the initial Kickstarter, which I think prior to Frosthaven was the largest Kickstarter for board games ever, it was delayed for a long time, and so was version 1.5, and so has every subsequent kind of expansion that should have happened since then. They've all run late, and so, Kingdom Death Monster has become a little bit synonymous with paying your money out and waiting a long time to get some of the goodies back that you've paid for. Another thing that people will say is Grail game. I think this barrier to entry gives Kingdom Death Monster a kind of a lofty position where a lot of people really want to try playing Kingdom Death Monster. but because of this huge barrier to entry of the cost and the availability, then generally they don't get the opportunity. Look, there's loads of things that will spring to mind if you mention Kingdom Death Monster. So what I'm going to do in this video is take an in-depth look at the solo game, and I'm going to provide both kind of arguments for and against, and counters for those arguments, whether they are for and against Kingdom Death Monster, because if you are thinking about making this purchase, it's potentially one of the biggest purchases you're ever going to make. Look, I've probably spent more on Kingdom Death Monster since I got it just over a year ago than maybe 2/3 of my board game collection. And whilst it's not the game that I got to the table the most, it's certainly the game that has taken up the most amount of time for me to play. I certainly played it for the longest amount of time. So there has to be something in there that sparks that kind of desire in me to play Kingdom Death Monster. So let's have a look at what you get with the game and how the game actually plays. So one of the key things that Kingdom Death Monster is known for is this big black obelisk of a box, something that wouldn't look out of place in 2001: A Space Odyssey. You can see the kind of primeval monkeys and chimps and man itself kind of throwing tools up to the sky and worshipping this thing if it was stood on its end. It is a beautiful, beautiful looking box, and if you've not seen it close up, it is absolutely huge. There we go, we've got 1, 2, 3, at least 3 handspans long by 2 handspans wide, and that's how big this box is. It has a huge table presence just as a box, and it is beautiful to look at. Now, when we take the lid off the box, the first thing you're going to see is going to be a box that has your miniature assembly in there. Now this thing is normally stored outside the box for me, so you'll see there's a bit of dust on there because I've made quite a few minis. I haven't made all the minis because there are so many minis, but you don't need to make all the minis to start playing the game. But if I open this up, you can see that I still have an entire lifetime's worth of minis and various armor kits and people and survivors that I could make, and I could just keep this thing going for a long time. And these are purely what's in the core kit. So let's take that out. However, to start off, as I mentioned, you don't need to make that many minis. What you could do is you could make 4 minis to start off with, and I would recommend 2 male and 2 female minis. And also, you can make your White Lion, and that's really all you need to start playing the game. If you don't fancy making minis, use proxies. I'm sure we all have lots of games that have lots and lots of minis with them, so you could use proxies. Now, I'd never painted anything prior to me receiving this game, and I hadn't made a model since I was about, I don't know, 13, so some kind of 36 years ago. But as you can see, you know, I've really enjoyed kind of making the models and painting the minis. I've found a new passion and a new kind of hobby for me since I got Kingdom Death Monster. So there we go. You can start playing the game with 4 Survivor minis and a White Lion mini, or use proxies. Then what you're going to see is you're also going to get these survivor sheets. So these are your tracking sheets for your survivors, and you will potentially, in a campaign, and a campaign lasts maybe 25 lantern years, you will go through quite a few of these sheets. However, don't let this be too daunting. We will talk about the paperwork and how you can make it a lot easier for yourself in a wee while. So that's the survivor sheets where you record their stats, etc. Then you will have your campaign or your settlement sheet. So for each campaign that you do, you will fill out one of these sheets as you progress, and there we go. You can see this one goes up to 36 lantern years, so that's 36 different times that you would go out and hunt and fight, etc. And these campaigns can last tens, if not hundreds of hours. But there are a number of these, and you can start different campaigns and different style campaigns. Again, may seem daunting. Don't let it worry you. We'll talk about how we can make this easier by using an app in a while. The real beautiful thing is the rule book. Now this rule book it's hardback, it's bound, it's got some wonderful illustrations in there, very adulting content, and what you will do is you will use this rule book not only to kind of find your way in and about the game, but also it will help you kind of progress parts of the game as well. It's kind of easy to get into the game, and Kingdom Death Monster isn't really a difficult game to learn. but I'll come on to that again in a while. And it does ease you into the game by playing the rulebook. We'll talk more about this in a bit. Then we have this board here. So this is your hunt board, which is there, and your settlement board, which is there. Because Kingdom Death Monster, in essence, is a game with 3 parts. It has a settlement mode where you will, it's almost civilization building. You're building up a village and building your kind of items and your gear, etc. And you're increasing the population and encountering stuff. Then you have a hunt mode where you've decided what beast you're going to hunt. You will then use a hunt mode to track it down. And then you have the fighting or the combat itself, or the showdown as it's known. And that's kind of the meat and potatoes of what people know of this game. Then we got the main board itself. Now, if you've seen pictures of Kingdom Death Monster, you'll know that this is a static board. It never changes. All your combat encounters are going to take place on this. You're also going to be using this to kind of track your the creature AI, the hit locations, the wound stack, the basic actions and various tokens, etc. And you're going to get these gear grids, 4 gear grids that you can get for Kingdom Death Monster, where you will kind of beef up and stack out your survivors to kind of say, right, this is the gear that they're going on the hunt with. Now, what I've done is through XE Laser, a UK-based company, I bought these acrylic gear grids, which are absolutely great. It means I can put my cards in there, and it just keeps it a little bit better, because these obviously slide around when you put your gear cards on there. And I've also replaced my kind of innovations and encounter deck with a huge acrylic, let's see if you can see that, a huge acrylic board, which helps me keep track of my settlement rather than having to lay the board out, or this kind of settlement board out, separately. So that's some of the ways I've kind of pimped up my copy of Kingdom Death Monster. Of course, you can use everything that comes with it, that is absolutely fine. So those are the board type components, and the minis. Don't get frightened by them. Then inside the box, you've got the very engine that drives the game itself. So here are all my various cards of all the various nemesis and bad guys and monsters that I will fight, all the various bits of gear I can get, all the tiles and tokens that you lay on the board and give to monsters, various little tokens that will be temporary on the board. This is the engine of the game itself. And as you can see, it comes in this really workable, or with this really workable insert, but the more expansions you get, you probably will have to upgrade the insert at some point. And of course, we get some of the beautiful etched dice that Kingdom Death Monster is known for, along with some D10s as well, which have the Kingdom Death Monster, or is it, lantern symbol on there. So that, people, friends, neighbours, is what you get when you will open your copy of Kingdom Death Monster. As I say, this is at least a year old. It's been out and had many, well, hundreds of hours of play in the last year or so. So it's not an exact what you get when the box is new for you, but hopefully that gives you an indication of what you get inside the box. So let's talk about the game itself now. So let's talk about the rules and the rule book of KDM. Now, the rules are way too long and varied for me to get into in kind of a couple of minutes segment on a video, and it's not really what you're here for. However, you know, this rule book itself is, as I mentioned in kind of when I showed you the contents of the box, I think is a fantastic rule book. First of all, it's hardbound, and secondly, the rules actually only take up maybe the first third of the book, because the rest of it is story-driven stuff that you get in there. And when you open the rule book, what you're going to get is lots of wonderfully evocative artwork, which kind of tells you the tale and why these survivors are there, which is scant to say the least, exactly how you kind of track them down, how you hunt them, how you kind of expand your settlement, and how you progress through the game in terms of lantern years. Then what will happen is it will have certain story elements within the rule book, which always come with these wonderful pieces of artwork, which some of them you have to play in this game for maybe hundreds of hours. Some of these encounters I've never even come across. And then you will get also, let me just find them, you will also get the showdowns of the various monsters that you're going to battle in the book as well. So things like the White Lion, which is going to be more or less, well, always going to be the first baddie that you, big monster that you come up against. It tells you how to set it up, how to progress in the various difficulties, and what happens when you win. And that is what you get inside that rule book. I think the rules are really, really simple to learn. But it's not an easy game to play because it gives you the mechanics on how you learn the game, but it doesn't necessarily teach you the best way to play the game. So let's talk about the early stage within this rulebook. So once you've gone through the kind of preamble story, which is all very nice and a little bit perfunctory, it gives you a kind of prologue, and you will play this on each and every adventure that you do. There are ways, I should imagine, that you can house rule it the more campaigns that you play. And the thing it says here is, of course, once you've read what you're going to do in the prologue, is it says, assemble some starting miniatures. So that's kind of 4 survivors and your White Lion. It does say that you can find detailed instructions at buildkingdomdeath.com. Let me tell you something right now. There aren't many instructions out there to make any of the minis that come with this. You're probably best off checking vibrantlantern.com, but in reality the game comes with lots of minis and no real instructions on how to make them. So the more you make, the easier they'll start. It'll become to make others. But there we go. It tells you to assemble just 5 minis. As I say, if you want to use proxies, then that's fine. And then what it does is it gives you this lovely way of starting to play the game. It tells you how to set your gear grids up. It tells you how to record on your survivor sheets, what everything does, how you create a survivor, give them a name, give them a sex, etc. What the various elements do, and it walks you through your first encounter, which is always going to be against the White Lion. And I think this is a really, really, really good way of introducing you to the mechanics of the game, what happens, how it works. If you follow this, your game will play different every time because it's dependent on some dice rolls and some randomness and how the cards are drawn. But if you play this, you will have a very, very good grasp on exactly how the showdown element works, how you as survivors operate, how the monsters operate, and the kind of mechanics behind what drives that, the dice rolls, the card draws, etc., how you inflict wounds on them. I wouldn't worry too much if most of your survivors die at this point, because as you get to the next stage, it will tell you what to do in the settlement phase. So as I mentioned, this is a game of 3 parts. You have the showdown, which is the combat. You have your settlement phase, which effectively helps you build up your settlement, your civilization, your innovations, which help you then progress your civilization, your story events, milestones. All these things become apparent and abundantly clear the more and more that you play the game. It will help you craft gear. It will tell you more about monsters, and then you will move into the hunt phase, which is using the hunt board, how you hunt these monsters. So in your settlement phase, you'll build up, you will choose which monster you're going to fight next, or it may be dictated for you as a story event. You will then go and hunt them down, and then you will move back to the showdown, where you will go out and actually fight the monster. And I think that is great. But not only that, with this rule book, as I mentioned, it's got the kind of first third is dictates to you how you should play the game, and it's pretty much like driving a car. You don't really learn how to drive a car until you've passed your test, and therefore you will not start to learn how to play Kingdom Death Monster properly until you've worked your way through the first third of the rule book. Then what we have, and I'll come on to these in a bit, are various ways in which the rule book becomes a reference book in how you drive the game forward, how you're going to sustain certain injuries, certain story elements that will happen on the hunt phase, and showdowns and encounters, etc., that progress as you go through the game. So that is this beautifully laid out rulebook, which will become your best friend as you play it. And there's also at the very back of it as well, there is kind of a graphic novel type adventure or novel type scenario, which just gives you a little bit more story on Kingdom Death Monster. And here we have a glossary of terms, which is highly useful, really highly useful. In fact, let's talk about terms and terminology right now. Okay, so I think it's fair to say that I'm pretty much a fan of how the rulebook is laid out. I love the look and the feel of this book, and it works exceptionally well in teaching you how to play the game and how to reference those key parts of the game that you need. However, because of the scope and the magnitude of Kingdom Death Monster, and even though essentially it's a relatively simple game to learn the mechanics of, and it's only got 3 parts, which are the showdown, the settlement, and the hunt phase, and those will repeat each and every lantern year. Those elements are relatively simple to learn. It is a game that is driven by a very, very large number of keywords. So at the back of the book, you do get this kind of number of pages that are handy reference in all the various keywords and what they mean. The issue being is that the scope and the grandeur of the game, and certainly as you start adding expansions to it as well, these keywords aren't necessarily intuitive, and there are some keywords that you may never come across during an entire campaign, or that you may experience only once, and it's pretty difficult to keep on track, keep track of all these various keywords. So this book, which I do think is a brilliant, brilliant book, becomes your best friend as you're referencing keywords. And these keywords can appear in your character development, on settlement events, on story events, on showdowns, on hunts, on the gear that you're crafting, on the weapons that you're using, on the armour that you give to your characters. And there are a lot of keywords to absolutely keep on top of. So if the very thought of keeping on top of a lot of keywords and understanding exactly how they affect the game, and some of them have a very drastic effect on the game, if that thought that is something that frightens you, then maybe that is something that goes down as a negative on Kingdom Death Monster for you. For me, I don't mind referencing, and I make mistakes, and I forget things, and sometimes I forget things that are in my advantage, sometimes I can forget things that are very much a disadvantage to me. It doesn't matter. It kind of plays with, or fits into the very nature of Kingdom Death Monster as this kind of real life, harsh, random kind of scenario where bad things just happen to people, and we forget to do things because sometimes we're idiots. So yeah, the thought keywords, if you don't like referencing them in this book, can be a bit off-putting for a lot of people. Okay, so we've got an indication of kind of what you get in the box of the core game and how the rulebook kind of works. Of course, it's a lot more complex than what I've discussed there. So now we're going to move into the gameplay. And a typical campaign in Kingdom Death Monster, and there are various campaigns depending on whether you've just got the core box or whether you've bought some of the expansions, will last maybe 25 or 30 lantern years. And each lantern year will consist typically of 3 phases, not always of 3 phases, but typically of 3 phases. And those 3 phases are your settlement event, your hunt event, and your showdown. Now the settlement event is kind of your civilization phase of the game. It's where you're going to build up your settlement. You're going to create new innovations and different ways to kind of expand the settlement. You maybe are going to do the deed and increase your settlement via kind of intimacy, or you're going to craft new weapons or create new buildings that help you craft new weapons, effectively beefing up your settlement and your survivors, so that when you get to the next showdown, which you will also define as part of your settlement event, then you're a little bit more prepared for it as they start to increase in kind of level and difficulty there as well. And you will also experience things like story events and settlement events, which will be ongoing through the time, through your campaign there. So that's the settlement event. Next up is the hunt event, which is where you're actually going to go out and hunt these creatures. Now this is where you will use the other side of the settlement event board and effectively track down whichever bad guy you've chosen, or whichever big bad monster you've chosen. You will track them down and unveil cars, which will kind of work in almost an RPG type way to create these seemingly random events as you're hunting the monster down. Once you've done that and you either hunted the monster down, you've ambushed it, or it's ambushed you, you're then going to move on to the showdown phase. And that's the combat element of the game that everybody potentially has seen, and that kind of gets progressively more difficult as you go through your campaign. So let's have a little look at the settlement event. I'm not going into all the detail on that. Then we'll move on to the hunt event, and then we'll move on to the showdown. So the settlement event is kind of what drives your progression forward. Each and every lantern year you will go through this event and you will start to increase and beef up your civilization and your characters accordingly. Now this is my settlement as it is laid out in my current campaign. I have a People of the Stars campaign, People of the Stars campaign going at the moment, which is in lantern year 11. So I have a number of things already laid out and I've got a number of innovations. And what happens is your survivors will come back and you'll work through this kind of progressively as you come back, and your survivors will return. And if they gain something called endeavour points, you will record the number of endeavour points they've gained. And what that does, those endeavour points, is allow you maybe to do things like intimacy, which allow two of your survivors, a male and a female, to do the deed and the beast with two backs and potentially create a new survivors from there. But they also allow you these endeavours also allow you certain things in some of the buildings you've got. For example, here we have a harvest ritual. So if you've got the Forbidden Dance innovation, you can carry out a harvest ritual which says for one endeavour point, spend any number of monster resource to draw an equal number of basic resources. That will make sense as you play the game. So yeah, as you can see, this goes progressively. So we've got the endeavour points, then we've got the update timeline, and what that is on your written sheet. If you are using the written version or the pad that comes with the game, you will update the timeline. That can also have effects as well. You will update your death count, because trust me, in this game your survivors will die. You will update milestone events, and then you will get to your kind of develop phase, and this is where you're going to craft new items. You're going to use the resources that you get from your showdowns to craft new items, to create new armor sets, new weapons, and there are a wealth and a plethora of new weapons. When you start, you will literally have a loincloth and a piece of stone, and that's all you will fight in the prologue. But trust me, the longer you play the game, the more resources that you gather, the more intricate these weapons can get, and soon you'll be slinging bone darts and maybe a catgut bow or maybe some lion katars, and your characters will start to beef up, and it will also give you scope and availability to start to increase the number of kind of stores and shops that you can use as well, depending on which creatures you defeat, depending on how strong you are, how many endeavour points you get. Then a big part of it as well is your innovations deck. So your innovations are here, and you get given so many innovations that you get to draw from. And what these do is they give you additional abilities as part of your settlement or as part of your ongoing abilities. So maybe you've got an innovation, or you've managed to produce an innovation which will then allow you to, each of your survivors, to move into the hunt phase or the showdown phase with an additional survival point. That will make sense in a bit. Throughout this as well, you're also going to encounter your story events. So the story events come in, or settlement events and story events come in two ways. First of all are the settlement events, and that's these here, and each year you will pull out a random settlement event which can have some good or bad things happening to your settlement depending on the dice rolls that you make. So this is a hugely random part of the game. A lot of the game is random and dice dependent, and this is a hugely random part of the game, is in the fact that these settlement events are kind of randomly drawn and the outcome of them are based on die rolls. But what you'll also encounter as well are various story events. Now these are either in the book that you're going to be using as the main core book, or each expansion that you get. So there's Dragon King, there's Gorm, there's Sunstalker, there's Slenderman, there's the Dung Beetle Knight. So each expansion that you get will add its own kind of story events into there. So at the moment I'm on a Dragon King campaign, so let's have a look at a particular story event on this. Let's have a look at Midnight's Children, which is on page 15. A second, there we go. Midnight's Children. So this is a story event, as it says at the top, Midnight's Children, and it says, the tyrant descends the obsidian staircase with a gift. He places the gift at the settlement centre, and heat washes over the cold stone ground for the first time. The settlement gains a radiant orb innovation. The tyrant beckons each survivor into the light, and the survivors marvel at their reflection. And there we go, we then have to count the number of survivors in the settlement that have at least one dragon trait. That's a particular thing for this campaign. If there are 3 or less, then they will roll on this, they will roll 1d10. If there are 4 or more, they will roll on this. And story events don't happen every year, but settlement events do absolutely happen every year. Once you've gone through this kind of all this here and you've developed enough, what you're then going to do is you are then going to choose and prepare your survivors that you're going to take into the hunt phase, because throughout all this, unless it's been dictated to you, you will have also chosen a monster to go into showdown against. Now, what happens after this, once you've chosen the survivors, we'll talk about gearing up in a wee while. You're then going to move on to the hunt phase. And the hunt phase happens more or less every year. Not necessarily every year, because some encounters bypass the hunt phase and you go straight into showdown. But let's talk about gearing up your survivors, how that works, and how we move into the hunt phase. Okay, so a major part of the settlement phase is actually gearing up, choosing your survivors and gearing them up to go and combat whichever monster you've wanted to fight or whichever has been dictated to you. Now, when you first start the game, you are, in your prologue encounter with the level 1 White Lion, you are pretty weak. You have a loincloth and you have a founding stone, and that is pretty much it. But as the game progresses, what will happen is when you defeat a monster, you will get resources, and when you get back to your settlement, you can use those resources to craft new items. So the more monsters that you defeat, the more resources you get, the more you can craft, and the higher level of monster that you defeat, the better resources that you get, and the more that you can craft. And you can see how that works. So what I'm going to show you is just how you kind of gear up some of your survivors. So each survivor has a 3x3 gear grid. Now, the gear grids are generally these cardboard things that come with the game. What I've done is I've upgraded mine. I bought these acrylic 3x3 grids that you get from XE Laser, and they've also got a colour-coded stand you can put your survivors in. It's optional. I've just decided to do that because I like the look of them. And what you will do is you will get your various gear cards that you collected throughout your campaign, and these will start to grow. You will get normal gear items. You'll get items that you crafted from defeating certain monsters a certain way, and you will put them into your gear grid. You will reach a stage eventually where you can actually have some, if not all, of your survivors with full gear grids, so it becomes a selection point. But in the early stages, chances are is that you're only going to have 1 or 2 items per survivor that you need to kind of divvy amongst them. Of course, what these will do, progressively these will get better. They will give you certain weapons that you can attack with. So here we have a catgut bow, or they will give you kind of armor that you can also use as well, which will offer increased protection. There we go, that offers a protection level of 2 there. So as you can see, you will gear up your survivors depending on what gear you have, you crafted, you've managed to get throughout the campaign. Your survivors will start to specialise in certain areas. So maybe they will specialise in the bow, or maybe they will specialise in the sword, and therefore you know to give them the sword and they will get increased benefits from doing that. But you will gear your survivors up in the settlement stage before you send them out to hunt whichever monster you're going to hunt. So I think it's fair to say that the settlement stage is the kind of the resource management and allocation stage of the game. You are crafting new items, you're building up from your resources new ways to move forward that better prepare you for your next showdown, where you're going to gain more resources there. And of course it is where we're going to use the gear grids, as I say, to kind of stack up and beef up your survivors before they go out and start the hunt phase. Now the hunt phase is really part of it which starts to kind of tip into RPG. There are some predefined elements and some elements that come from cards on there. So let's have a look at how the hunt phase works. So you've chosen your survivors, you geared them up, you've chosen which monster you actually want to face in the showdown. The next phase is the hunt phase, and effectively you're going to use the other side of the settlement board, which gives you the hunt board. Depending on which level of monster you've chosen, it will start in various spaces on the hunt board, and what's going to happen is your survivors are going to move down this board, unearthing new events that will either help or hinder them in reaching their quarry. And these events can either be kind of specific events to that monster. So here we have an aromatic breeze card, which is a card which says the hungry lion sniffs the survivor's musk on the wind. Move the white lion 1 space towards the survivors on the hunt board. If it moves into the survivor's space, the white lion ambushes the survivors. Or it could be some random hunt events. And what these random hunt events are, is these are where the game tips over into kind of RPG. It's like having an RPG without a games master. You're going to use dice to determine which event happens when you unearth these random events. Let me show you how that works. So we're a couple of turns into the hunt phase, and now it's Zachary's turn. This is my blue survivor here, and he's moved on to this space and he's unearthed this random event card. And what it says here is that you will roll D100 on the event table and then choose then experience whatever that says there. Now in this wonderful rulebook, you have this kind of plethora here of 100 different events that you can choose from, or that you could roll, and that's purely random based on what you roll. So for example, it says here, the white die is a 10 and the black die is 1. So here we go, we're going to roll, and it's number 45. So there we go, we turn to 45 and it says, here we go, 45, Jagged Valley, just down here. So it says, a valley of sharp white stones opens before the survivors, looking just like a toothy maw. As the survivors push and climb through the jagged spires, they find that even the shallowest nick bleeds profusely. Each survivor suffers 1 event damage to the body, unless the survivor has bandages to patch up their wounds. All survivors also gain 2 bleeding tokens. If any survivor has a pickaxe, they may try to convince the other survivors to let them investigate a little bit more. If they are convinced, they roll 1d10, and here we go, it's another dice rolling thing here. So if they've got a pickaxe, you can investigate more. Roll a d10, that's coming out as 1, and number 1 there says, what's it say? It says, the white stones are teeth and the survivors are in a giant mouth. Everyone must spend 1 survival to scamper out of the mouth. Anyone remaining inside is chewed to a pulp. Dead. Do not gain the benefits of cannibal eyes. I mean, this is kind of harsh, and that is the game in its entirety. There is a massive amount of kind of random encounters that you can get in this game, and all of a sudden your game can be over in a heartbeat if you've chosen the wrong encounter, and that's why you have so many survivors, hopefully, in your settlement at any one time. So as you can see, the game is pretty brutal and harsh, and it's entirely possible that throughout your hunt phase that you could lose 1 or more of your survivors, and therefore you'll get into the showdown phase when you finally catch up with the monster with less than a full complement, and you will probably almost certainly have less ability than you had when you started out on the hunt phase. So anyway, this will progress up and down the hunt board. You may get moved back, the creature may get moved back or forward until you encounter each other on the same space, or a card dictates otherwise. Once you've done that, then you move from the hunt phase into the combat phase, into the actual showdown, and that's where you will fight the creature. So everything you've been doing in your Lantern year and your previous Lantern years have been leading to this point, because everything that you do kind of culminates in one Lantern year in the showdown against the monster that you've chosen. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to set up a kind of random imaginary encounter against the white lion. I could have used maybe the phoenix, who is a slightly more difficult enemy, you could say, but each enemy has different difficulty settings. So we'll set this up, and how successful you are is based on a number of things. One of those things is how you created your civilization and crafted throughout your settlement events. What have you done? What gear have you got? What experience do your survivors have at this point? These could be brand new survivors that we just created in the last Lantern year, or they could be some of your more experienced survivors. So you get to choose, is it worth sending an experienced survivor out on this, which could be a particularly difficult showdown, and run the risk of actually losing that survivor, could get killed, or do I send more inexperienced ones out to gain experience points? So you've got that, you've got the amount of gear that you've got in terms of your crafting as well. You've got also the level of monster that you're fighting, and you will progressively choose those levels, and the different monsters you can fight. So there's all these variables coming in, but the most important variable is a lot of this, and your success will come down to your dice rolls. That's right, because the combat is a card and dice based game. There are mitigation strategies in place, and that's what all the gear and everything that you're doing absolutely leads towards, is mitigating these dice rolls. But just trust me on this, the dice can be absolutely deadly, and things can turn just like that for you. So in your various books, be it the main rule book or any expansion books, there's always going to be a section about how to set up your particular showdown. There we have the White Lion, we have the Screaming Antelope, we have the Phoenix, we have the Kingsman. These are all in the core book. And what that does is from this area here, it tells you where you're going to place your survivors, where you're going to place your monster, and what other things go on there like terrain tiles, etc. It also gives you an indication on how you set your lion up or your monster up, because the monster is going to be dictated, how it works is going to be dictated by these cards just here, which is your AI deck. And there are a number of these cards, and each strength or level of monster that you get will have a number of different cards in their AI deck, and that will drive it forward. When you damage a monster, what's going to happen is you're going to pull out a hit location card, which gives you something else to do once you've struck a hit on the particular monster. And if you're successful on the hit location card, what will happen is you will remove one face down AI card and put it in the wound stack. When all of these AI cards are in the wound stack and you perform one more hit, that's it, you have defeated the monster. So that's how you track the monster's health. You will chase it around the board, you will strike hits on it as and when you can. When you do strike a hit, you get a hit location card, you will roll on that. If that's successful, you will then move a wound card, an AI card to the wound stack. However, these AI cards are also how the monster moves. So every monster turn, it's going to draw an AI card, and it will use whatever information is on there to move against your survivors. So let me show you a little bit how that works. So ordinarily, obviously, if you're starting out a combat encounter or a showdown, you've got your 4 survivors. But I'm just going to do this from the perspective of one survivor. And we're calling this survivor Sally. And as you can see from her gear grid here, she has a loincloth, which gives her an additional 1 kind of health on her waist. She has a scrap sword, and she also has some bone darts. So the scrap sword is for up close fighting, and the bone darts she can throw from any position. So what we'll do is we'll show you how the survivor works first, and then show you how the lion works. So first of all, generally, your survivor will start, and it will have a movement and an action. Now there are ways to get more movements and actions, but generally it's going to be a movement and an action. You can see that the movement is always predefined as 5. That means it can move 5 spaces. There are ways that can increase or decrease, but let's work with the 5 now. So we're going to move 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and we're right in front of the White Lion now. So let's just zoom in on that there. So we're right in front of the White Lion, and we're going to commence a combat roll against the White Lion now. Because I'm in front of the White Lion, I'm going to use my scrap sword. So as you can see from there, it says here that there are 3 figures down the side here. There's a 2, a 5, and a 3. The first figure is how many dice I actually roll. The second dictates what number I have to achieve on that die to get that, to make it a success. And the third is the strength of this particular weapon, because each particular monster that you fight has a certain toughness. And here we go, if we've got level 1 White Lion, it's a 6 toughness. So what that means is my dice roll, once I add them together, including the strength on there, has got to be more than that 6 for it to cause a damage. So let's have a look at how that actually works. So if we go to the dice bucket, here we go, the dice bucket. I'm going to roll my 2 dice, because as you remember, my scrap sword has a value of 2. And there we go, I got a 6 and a 4 on there. And if we look at that, that means that my strength has to be 5 or more. So there we go, I've managed to actually achieve that on 1 dice. That means I've got 1 hit, because I got a 6, and the strength I had to achieve on my scrap sword is a 5. So what that means now is I am going to pull from the hit location card, hit location deck, one of these hit location cards, and this one says you clip the tense muscles of the heel Critical wound. Your precise attack ruins the monster's straining tendon, and this will cause a persistent injury. So a critical wound is if, when I roll for this hit and I get strength, I get a lantern on there. That means I performed a critical wound, and they can have ongoing kind of benefits, if you like, or disbenefits for the monster, and certainly benefits for me. So now we're going back to the dice roll itself to find out how much whether I've successfully damaged this creature. So let's perform this dice roll then. So we know that I've got a strength of 3 on this scrap sword, and we also know that the monster's toughness is on a level 1 white lion. It's a toughness of 6. That means that I have to roll a 3 or more on this roll to successfully hit this monster. So let's have a look at this. And there we go, I've rolled a 6, so I've successfully damaged this monster. What I would then do is take one of the AI cards, and I would move it into the wound stack, one of the face down AI cards, move it into the wound stack, then we would move on to the monster's turn. However, had I rolled, I don't know, I've got toughness of 3, I need to get 6 or more. Had I rolled a 1, so that my total score was only 4, I would have not hit that monster. A couple of things can happen then, is that first of all, I would have moved the hit location into the discard pile. That will always happen after you've finished anyway. Or you can draw a card like this, and it says if there's a failure, then there's some kind of action that the monster will take. And here it says move the monster full forward in a straight line. And what that would have done is gone through me. It would have knocked down my player. Oops, there we go, my survivor. Well, just a sec. It would have gone. The monster would have moved straight through me, knocked down my survivor, and would have kind of put them out for the count, and can cause additional injuries as well. So if you don't successfully strike the monster, then what can happen are bad things. And actually, sometimes even if you do successfully strike the monster, it can there's a reflex action on wounds as well sometimes. So even if you do successfully strike, then what that means is that you can also be damaged by submitting a successful strike against the monster. Okay, so that's the kind of the survivor's turn. Of course, you would do this, then the monster would go, and then all the survivors would go, and the monsters would go. Let's have a look at the monster turn now. So you've got the basic gist there on how the survivors fight during the showdown. Look, there are loads and loads of nuances and variables and lots of things I could talk about, spend hours talking about. But let's move on to how the monster actually fights itself. Now, all of the monsters work in exactly the same way. They're all going to be operated by an AI deck, and this AI deck will get progressively more complex. The kind of different monsters that you fight, and also the different levels of monster that you fight as well. So whether that's actually the white lion, or whether it's the phoenix, or whether it's the dragon king, or even the gorm, and all of these, these are either with the base game, or some of them are expansions that I bought and painted as well. They're all going to operate exactly the same way, and that's through this AI deck. And how this works is, when it's the monster's turn, you're going to pull an AI card, and on this AI card it tells you how the monster's going to react here. It's going to pick a survivor, and it details how that's going to happen there. Then it's going to move and attack the target, and its speed is 2, so if you remember, speed is the number of dice it can roll. Its accuracy is 2+, that means it only has to get a 2 or more on these dice to actually strike damage towards your survivors, and then it does a damage on this particular card of 1. I'll talk a bit. I'll talk in a couple of seconds about how damage works. I really like the damage mechanism there. And what also happens as well is, of course, sometimes there are additional things which will always do you damage on the card. Now, as you saw from when you attack as a survivor, the only way to defeat the monster is by successfully striking it, hitting it, and carrying out a wound and depleting this AI stack, because these act as your wounds. So the more hits that you do, the less cards it has to actually offer you. So that means that the creature gets progressively weaker throughout the entire combat experience. So let's have a quick look at how damage occurs, because this is kind of a cool system. So we saw earlier from the AI card just a few moments ago that the white lion on this attack, if he's next to my survivor, is going to have a speed of 2. That means I roll 2 of these dice. So let's have a look at this then. Let's roll 2 of these dice and see what happens. So I've got a 4 and a 9 on there, and if you see on this, it says accuracy is 2+. That means that this creature on this particular thing, by getting a 4 and a 9, has successfully achieved 2 lots of damage for me, and it says here that the damage on the card means that it's 1 damage. That means I'm going to roll 2 of these attack dice. And what these are, these have different icons on them for the different parts of the body. Now on your gear grid, on your kind of record here on your gear grid, you'll have different armor levels, and if you remember from Sally here, all she's got is a loincloth which offers 1 armor on her waist. That means that she's fairly unarmored. So I'm going to roll this, and here we go. We can see that she's going to suffer a damage to the body and a damage to the head. So what we would then do on Sally's sheet is we would then mark off, here we go, 1 on the body, so we get 2 automatic on the body, so there's 1 gone there, and we want to get 1 on the head. So if she was to sustain another injury on her head, that means that she would then sustain a severe injury, and that's where this great element comes in. So in the book you have the severe injuries table, and what this does is, this is where you're going to roll a dice to determine what happens to your survivor. So let's say that Sally has kind of had too many injuries to her head, and now she's got to roll for a severe injury. She's taken an injury and she can't actually defend against it. We're going to roll 1d10. So here we go, and we got a number 3, and here on number 3 it says decapitation, you are dead. And that is it. That is the beauty of this game, which equally frustrates and delights a lot of people, is your character can be killed just like that. Just because you have a super beefed up character doesn't mean that something can't happen that means that they can't be killed in the blink of an eye. I mean, look at this one. We have head explosion. Your head erupts in a shower of gore, killing you instantly. All survivors are also so disturbed that they lose 1 survival. So that has an abject effect on the very survivors around you. Or if you get a 10 plus, it's destroy tooth. You have 3 plus. If you have 3 plus courage, you boldly split the tooth out and gain +2 insanity. Otherwise, the blow sends you sprawling and you are knocked down. So the higher your rolls are, the kind of when you get to the severe injuries table, the less chance you have of dying. But not only on that is you get your severe injuries for your physical, but you also get your brain trauma injuries as well. So here on the sheet we have your brain there, which is protected by insanity. And again, once that's depleted, you will make a brain trauma roll. So let's do this. Oh, we got a lantern on that for that first roll. That's here we go, that's 10, that's a frenzy. So again, 1d5 insanity, +1 speed token, +1 strength token, so that works out really well. But had you got a 1 or a 2, you would have suffered mortal terror, no ifs, ands or buts, the survivor is dead. So you can see that it can be pretty brutal in how it deals with how your survivors kind of cope with severe injuries. That is how the game will progress from the Showdown perspective. And of course, I'm being exceptionally brief in this. I could go on and talk about this for a long time because there are so many nuances. The battle, each showdown you have will change and be determined based on the monster that you're fighting, the level of monster that you're fighting, the amount of gear that your survivors have, which survivors you're using, and 100 different effects. And that is the beauty of this game, is that, you know, a particular showdown may last 30 minutes. I've had a showdown that's lasted nearly 3 hours. I've had showdowns that have swung wildly from me losing to having a total party kill. And the showdown will end when either all your survivors are killed that are on there, or you killed and defeated the monster. And depending on which level of monster you've defeated, you will get rewards, which you can then take back into the settlement phase for the next lantern year and use those rewards to craft new items, and now you can see the cycle going there. And the game will then continue until you've actually completed the campaign, done all the lantern years, completed and defeated all the big bads and the end big bads, or all of your survivors in your settlement are dead. So on my current campaign, I'm at lantern year, I think 11 or 12 at the moment, and I have about half of my survivors left. There are ways that I can improve that, but I need to build more gear. And that's it. And that is the kind of the game in a nutshell. It's a cycle of kind of lantern year on lantern year, progressively increasing your settlement and kind of fighting against the ravages of nature and of supernatural, as well as battling more big bads so you can get more gear, get more resources to build more gear and ultimately get to the end of the campaign. let's have a talk about part of the game that some people don't like, and that is the bookkeeping. Because when you get the core game, before you get to any of those of the showdowns, even on the prologue, you have to start creating things using the pads and that arrive with the game, and using a pencil. For every survivor that you create, that you create and you give a name to, you're going to have to use one of these survivor record sheets. And there are a number that come with the game, but as you can imagine, over maybe a 25 lantern year game, your population can increase quite a lot. And these things, you need to record in pencil when they go out to battle, how their experience and their skill points increase, how their fighting arts and disorders happen, loads and loads of things to write down on these sheets, and you will get through a fair few of these in any one campaign. And what that means is that there is a large element potentially of pen and paper or pencil and paper based bookkeeping. Not only that, but you also have to fill out for your settlement and for your campaign one of these settlement event sheets as well, or these settlement record sheets. And this again details what happens in each lantern year, how your settlement is growing and increasing in size and in stature, or maybe even decreasing as you go through it when it hits milestones. So you will update that every lantern year. You'll update that with every interaction you have with a survivor as well. So there can be a very large element of bookkeeping and kind of record keeping, which can be made a lot simpler. There is a way around this, and that is to use the Scribe app. Now, Scribe is an excellent app which records everything that you would normally do on pen and paper, from your settlement to your locations, your innovations, your innovation deck, what principles you have, what milestones you've kind of reached, kind of what your bonuses are as well. You can also have a look at things like your resources and what items you can craft from the resources that you've got there. Have a look at each of your survivors as well, both living and dead. The Scribe app is absolutely invaluable. I would say absolutely for your first few games use the paper-based method, because you need to understand the methodology behind it. But once you've done that, the move to Scribe is a necessity that makes the bookkeeping almost negligible in Kingdom Death Monster. Okay, so thank you for joining me on this journey, and here's now my final thoughts on Kingdom Death Monster. Now, if you watch my top 10 solo games I played in 2019, you will see that Kingdom Death Monster is my number one solo game. And I almost didn't put it on that list, because I think that Kingdom Death Monster is almost in and of itself an entire hobby, basically. It's almost an entire hobby in and of itself. It's truly a boutique experience. It is a game that you could literally just lay out and separate from the rest of board gaming, because it has these deep gaming elements, these RPG elements, the storytelling elements, the model making, the model painting, the continuous amount of expansions, the lore you can create in this world. It's almost like separating Dungeons and Dragons from board gaming. That is a very similar experience to Kingdom Death Monster. However, I did put it at my number one, and it works for me. But there are some real pluses and minuses on Kingdom Death Monster. Look, let's start on the real big one, the one that will put most people off Kingdom Death Monster: the cost. It is a huge investment to make to even get the core game of Kingdom Death Monster. We're talking £300, $400 just for the core game. Sure, if you buy it on Black Friday, they have a Black Friday sale every year, you'll get it at a discount, but it's still a hefty investment just for a core game. Now, in these days when Kickstarters, once you add all the various add-ons and whatnot, they're coming in at maybe a couple of £100 on a Kickstarter. This still eclipses most Kickstarters for the core game. So is that £300, $400 worth it for you as a board gamer? Well, I hope that what you've seen in this video and what you've seen maybe on other videos and other people playing it has given you an indication of whether this game is for you. Am I going to recommend that you buy this game? No, because this is a huge investment. What I'm hoping to do via this video is give you an indication on some of the mechanics behind it and what you get and some of the pluses and minuses for it, but I'm not going to tell you to go out and buy Kingdom Death Monster. I did. I went and bought the core game. I spent my £300 on it. And since then, I bought a huge number of expansions. Not all of the expansions. And trust me, there are people that spend way more than I have on expansions. But, you know, I've probably spent close to £1,000 on this game now. I don't regret a single penny of that. I found a new hobby in making models and painting models. And I do thoroughly enjoy the experience of delving into the world of Kingdom Death Monster for a few days. It works for me. I am not going to tell you to go out there and spend £300 or £400 on a core game. Now, if you did, and you know, you're kind of on the fence, and people will say to you, do you know what, if you just bought the core game, then there's enough there to play for a long time. And they're right, there is, but are you actually going to be satisfied just having the core game? The chances are not. What happens is most people I've seen and I've known that have got Kingdom Death Monster since I've got it, is they've ended up buying up more and more expansions and spending kind of £75, £100, £150 on a particular expansion. And that is, you know, that is the kind of the nature of the beast with Kingdom Death Monster. The £300 is a gateway drug. You will end up spending, if you like it, you will end up spending a lot more. Now, if you do spend that money and you play the game and you don't like it, and trust me, you're going to have to play it for a while before you truly make a choice. If you don't like it, the after sales market is really strong on this. So I'm not saying that, you know, go out and spend £300 because you're going to sell it all for £200 if you don't like it and only lose £100, but there is an after sale market, so there is a kind of safety net there in terms of the cost. So yes, cost is huge. There is absolutely no way I'm going to justify you guys spending that amount of money, tell you it's the right or the wrong thing to do. What I'm just going to say is, here's everything that goes with the game. You make up your own minds. So another major thing which affects a lot of people's decisions on whether they want to play, buy and keep Kingdom Death Monster is the tone of the game. It's a mature game, you know, it's a brutal game, there's blood and gore, but that's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is the kind of old school abject misogyny that's in the game. All of the women that you see in the game, from obviously the illustrations you see in the book to some of the models that you can buy as you kind of, you know, you buy more and more models, they're completely sexualized. The proportions of the women, they are big boobs, big butts, not many clothes, and it's, you know, it can be a real issue for a lot of people. If you are sensitive to that, and I'm not saying you're a sensitive person by being sensitive to that, what I'm saying that if that is an issue for you, then there is no way that Kingdom Death Monster is going to be the game for you. You can use proxies, absolutely, but every book you get will have some picture of a buxom broad in there, you know, flashing their boobs off, or almost flashing their boobs off, whilst the men are all chiseled physiques and kind of, you know, there we go, you can see on that picture there, there's the lady, and the men are all chiseled physiques and good looking guys. So there is a real issue with the tone of the figures and how women are portrayed in this book. If you look at some of the expansions, some of the creations that Adam Poots has come up with sway wildly from absolutely fantastic, incredible creations to the equivalent of drawing a cock and balls on the back of your school textbook. You get that real puerile schoolboy humour in these almost Japan-y big boobed women, these kind of heavy metal cartoon characters of days gone by. Look, the game doesn't shy away from it. It embraces it. I can bypass it. You know, the misogyny is only in terms, I suppose, in terms of the actual artwork and tone. As far as characters are concerned, as you play the game, the female characters are treated just as equally and as brutally as the male characters are. But you do get this abject imagery, which can be really off-putting for people. I'm not going to justify that. I don't think it's my place to justify that. You will have to do your own research and have a look. And, you know, check out some of the images online. Things like the wet nurse. If you think the wet nurse, which is this giant kind of amorphous penis with penises coming off it, if you think that that is your kind of bag, or maybe even, you know, as we look at the Sunstalker here, and you can see that one of the appendages is actually a penis coming off the Sunstalker. You know, there are things that just really will affect a lot of people. So if you are sensitive to that kind of stuff, I'm not saying you're a sensitive person, but you're sensitive to that kind of imagery, you have a young family, you want to leave this laid out, then it could well be that Kingdom Death Monster is just not the game for you if it's going to affect you in that way. In reality, Kingdom Death Monster probably is a never-ending game. You know, you will play your various campaigns, and then you will go and start another campaign, because each campaign, no matter, even if you're only playing with the core characters, will never play exactly the same way twice. And certainly, as you start upgrading with the various expansions like the Sunstalker or the Gorm, these are different gameplay elements, and things like Sunstalker and the Dragon King add entirely new campaigns onto there, so it becomes this never-ending thing. And along with that, we harken back to what I was talking about when I talked about cost, is this need to constantly add content to your collection of Kingdom Death Monster. You know, new expansions get released infrequently, but sometimes in large numbers, and there's always new models to buy and new cards to have, and that can absolutely, totally change your game. I would consider myself as a relative kind of low-level Kingdom Death Monster collector. I have the core game and a few expansions. There are people out there that absolutely make it a hobby in itself when new stuff is launched, to go out there and get these first run copies of models so they can have the certificate saying it's number 1 of 1,000 or whatever. There are people out there that will spend a lot of money on buying this additional content, and generally it will add something to the game, be that in the format of gear cards, or in the format of, I don't know, adding another enemy into the game, or, as I say, a new campaign. So you can continuously expand your experience of Kingdom Death Monster. And how successful you are in a game can vary wildly based on what expansions you have. The base game, you're going to fight the White Lion, but if you get the Gorm expansion, you can replace the Gorm, or even add the Gorm into your game. So you can replace the White Lion or add the Gorm into your game. That gives you a Gormery and a Gormichrist, which gives you more opportunities to get better gear. And that gear, how you get that gear, relatively early on in the campaign, can absolutely dictate your success in a campaign. And I think that's a really important point that we have to cover, is the fact that when you first start playing Kingdom Death Monster in your first campaign, the choices, you're not really going to know what choices you want to make, what gear you want to get, what armor you want to start building. If you don't follow, not a strict course, but if you don't follow certain paths in kind of upgrading your armor quickly, getting some projectile weapons, then it can be that you're making the campaign way too difficult for yourself. So there is a huge learning curve in Kingdom Death Monster that is probably going to take tens, if not hundreds of hours to start fine-tuning your strategy, because those early calls that you make in terms of what gear you craft can absolutely affect how you progress, certainly in the middle stages of any campaign. And that is a key thing in itself, because Kingdom Death Monster as an entire hobby is a time sink, and that's why I say it's almost pertinent to kind of stick it outside of board gaming as a separate boutique hobby, because, you know, when you start delving into a particular campaign, chances are you're not going to set it up, play it for an hour, put it away, get it out in 3 months' time and play another game. You're going to want to continue playing, because there are things that you need to remember to do as you're progressing your characters, and it takes a long time. I mentioned earlier that I've had showdowns that have taken 2 or 3 hours, and that comes off the back of doing a hunt for maybe kind of 30 or 40 minutes, and then a settlement phase for 30 or 40 minutes. So one game session can be 3 or 4 hours long, and I've only done 1 lantern year. Similarly, you could run through it in about an hour's time as well. But there are choices that you will make, and story events that will happen, and things that you will need to go through to absolutely get the most out of your campaign. So the time sink element is absolutely huge in Kingdom Death Monster. If you do not have the time for a sprawling campaign, and if you just want to do some one-shot, one-hit kind of games that you want to kind of, play it for an hour and put it away, it's probably not going to be for you. You're going to have to create a space where you can devote the time to Kingdom Death Monster. And I am going to mention again, and I know I've already mentioned them, the big slew of keywords that are in this game. And, as I mentioned earlier, they're in the back of the rulebook. It's a very keyword dependent game. And your enjoyment of it is going to be almost based on how much you enjoy referencing and looking up keywords, because there is so much going on in this game, and each expansion that you add to it. So in the Dragon King, there's some terminology that will be bespoke to the game purely because it's in the Dragon King campaign. So you'll have to start thinking about new terminology for each and every single campaign that you put together. When you get new weapons, there will be new terminology on there. When you experience new settlement or story events, there will be new terminology. The game is constantly giving you more and more terminology. For me, I absolutely adore that. It's a game and a gift of discovery, of finding new ways. And I don't beat myself up too bad if I'm halfway through a particular showdown and I've forgotten a particular keyword on, one of my characters' kind of armor or its weapon or on something else. I don't beat myself up too much because it might change that immediate outcome, but it doesn't change necessarily the expanse of the campaign. So for me, I love that kind of discovery journey, but do be prepared. If you get it, you're going to be referencing those keywords, and if that is something that you don't like doing, then again, Kingdom Death Monster may not be for you. So all this, I'm kind of pointing out these kind of wild negatives, may seem that, I don't like the game of Kingdom Death Monster, and we know that's not true, because I forgive almost everything that it throws at me that can be construed as a negative. I made the decision that I was going to part with my cash. I had spare cash. I wanted to invest it in Kingdom Death Monster. I'd done my research and knew it was a game that I could potentially fall in love with. I just happened to fall in love with the model making and the model painting on the back of that. If that is not your thing, then that could be something that really detracts from this from you. I love the fact that each and every time I play it, it offers something new and different. It offers a different challenge. The early stages now I can pretty much breeze through, but once you start getting to kind of Lantern Years 4 and 5, then things start to get more difficult. I've started to learn some strategies about what gear I need to start crafting early on, in which direction my survivors need to go. The use of the Scribe app has been kind of a life changer as well. I didn't mind the paper and pencil stuff, but using the Scribe app, that really, really has changed the game a lot for me, and now it's kind of a breeze to do that bookkeeping part of it. I personally love the Showdown Phase. I know there are people that don't so much love the Showdown Phase, but they think the Settlement Phase is fantastic. For me, the Settlement Phase is something, and maybe I need to put more effort into that to get more out of the Showdown Phase. So they are complementary, but it's kind of horses for courses there. If you love this, the very fact of kind of crafting your own weapons, building up your settlement, kind of building up your civilization, then the settlement phase could well be for you. It may well be that the hunt phase is just something you have to go through, or the hunt and the showdown phase is something you have to go through to get to the settlement phase. For me, I absolutely adore the showdown combat, and when I'm deep inside these kind of 2 and 3 hour battles when things are swinging from one way to the other, and I've lost some of my favourite survivors. I've got attached to certain survivors and I've had them for maybe 6 or 7 Lantern Years, and then that's it, on the roll of a dice that becomes they're gone. And I love that. I love the randomness of the rolls of the dice. I like the fact that it mimics a little bit in real life, in that shit just happens to people, basically, and you can be as prepared as you want and mitigate all you want, but nothing sometimes is going to stop bad things happening to you, and that's pretty much Kingdom Death Monster. I don't feel cheated. I feel exceptionally upset, but I don't feel cheated. I love, I say, the progression, the growth, the scope of the game, the fact that there are different challenges. I like the fact that you have this ongoing community that you can get as involved with, or involved with as much or as little as you want. I love Kingdom Death Monster. It's a game for me. Is it a game for you? I can definitively say I don't have a clue, because my thoughts aren't your thoughts. All I can say is it hits almost every button for me, and there's an absolute reason as to why Kingdom Death Monster is my #1 solo board game, and I would almost put it in an entirely different category all on its own. Wow, not board gamers, thank you very much on joining me through this very special episode where we've taken a pretty in-depth look, but not a totally in-depth look at Kingdom Death Monster. As you know, it's just my favourite game ever, and I make no apologies for that whatsoever. Look, thank you very much for joining Not Board Gaming on this very special journey. My name's Mark, I've been your host. Do remember you can always follow us on Facebook or on Instagram. That's Not Board Gaming, that's always BORED. And don't forget, you can always like and subscribe to the channel and check out our other videos. In the meantime, thank you very much for joining me. Stay safe, and one final thought: if you can't find anybody else to play with, there's nothing wrong with playing with yourselves. Until next time.